The air in the records room of Metropolitan General Hospital was stale, thick with the scent of old paper and dust. It was a forgotten corner of a world that moved at the speed of crisis. Here, time slowed to a crawl, measured in the rhythmic clack of a keyboard and the soft rustle of files. For Alara Vance, this was a sanctuary, a quiet, gray place where she could be invisible. She kept her head down, her light brown hair falling forward to cover the faint, silvery scar that cut through her right eyebrow. It was an old wound, but it ached sometimes, a phantom pain that reminded her of a life she fought every day to forget. Here, she wasn't Captain Vance. She wasn't Angel, the flight nurse who could set a bone in a banking helicopter under enemy fire. Here, she was just Ellie. Ellie the Snail, they called her. The nickname was a gift from Dr. Alistair Finch, chief of trauma surgery. He was a man sculpted from arrogance and ambition, with a surgeon's skill matched only by his cruelty. He moved through the hospital like a shark, sensing weakness, and in Alara, he had found an ocean of it. She was slow, deliberate. When she walked, she didn't rush. When she filed, she checked every label twice. To the frantic, adrenaline-fueled staff of the emergency department, her pace was a source of constant, simmering frustration. To Dr. Finch, it was a personal affront. "Vance!" His voice cut through the relative quiet of the nurses' station, sharp and cold. Alara flinched, her shoulders hunching instinctively. She was organizing a stack of patient intake forms, her movements careful. She looked up, her heart starting a low, panicked drumbeat against her ribs. Dr. Finch stood with his arms crossed, his expensive tailored suit immaculate against the hospital's utilitarian grime. A small crowd of residents and nurses, his sycophants, hovered behind him. Dr. Peterson was among them, a smirk already playing on his lips. "Did you file the charts from the morning intake?" Finch's tone was deceptively calm. It was the quiet before the storm. "Almost, Doctor," Alara said, her voice barely a whisper. "I was just double-checking the coding on the last batch." Finch took a slow step forward. "Double-checking, of course, because the fate of the free world hinges on your meticulous, glacial-paced review of paperwork." A few of the residents chuckled. Alara's face burned with shame. She focused on the stack of files, her hands trembling slightly. "I just want to make sure it's right." "You want to make sure it's right," he repeated, mocking her. He snatched a file from the top of her stack. He glanced at it, then tossed it contemptuously onto the counter. "This is a hospital, Vance, not a library. Things move fast here. People's lives are on the line. Your diligence," he said the word like it was a disease, "creates bottlenecks. It creates chaos." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss that only she could hear. "You are a clerk, a paper pusher. You are the lowest rung on a ladder you couldn't even begin to comprehend. Do you understand me?" She nodded, unable to speak, her throat tight. "I need a verbal confirmation, Vance," he said, his voice rising again for the benefit of his audience. "Or is that too complex a task for you as well?" "Yes, Dr. Finch," she whispered. "Pathetic," he sneered. He turned to his entourage. "Let this be a lesson. Inefficiency is a cancer. We cut it out. We don't coddle it." He gestured dismissively at Alara. "Clean up this mess." He swept away, his followers trailing in his wake like pilot fish. Chloe, a young nurse with kind eyes, lingered for a moment. "Don't listen to him, Ellie. You're doing a good job." Alara couldn't look at her. The pity was almost worse than the scorn. She just nodded, gathering the scattered files, her world shrinking to the small, humiliating space around her. She retreated to the safety of the records room, the scent of dust and paper a comforting balm on her shredded nerves. She closed the door, leaned against it, and squeezed her eyes shut. She wasn't a soldier anymore. She was just support staff. And she had to remember her place. The chaos began with a sound, a low, growing symphony of sirens that bled through the hospital walls, getting closer and closer until they were a screaming, frantic chorus right outside. On the 5th floor, in the quiet tomb of the records room, even Alara could feel the shift. A tremor in the building's foundation. The energy of the hospital changed, coiling into a tight knot of anticipation. She heard the overhead call. "Mass casualty incident, incoming. All available staff to the ER. Code triage. Alara's hands stilled on her keyboard. Her training, buried under years of quiet routine, stirred. For a moment, she felt the old pull, the instinct to run towards the crisis, not away from it. She quickly smothered it. That wasn't her job anymore. Her job was to wait for the inevitable tidal wave of paperwork. Down in the emergency department, it was controlled pandemonium. A multi-car pileup on the interstate. Gurneys streamed through the ambulance bay doors, each carrying a new tableau of human suffering. Doctors and nurses moved with a practiced, urgent grace, their voices sharp and clear as they called out vitals and injuries. At the center of it all was Dr. Finch. This was his theater. He was a maestro conducting an orchestra of trauma, his commands precise, his decisions absolute. He pointed. Bed 3, probable aortic rupture. Get him to OR 1, now. Bed 5, severe head trauma. Get a CT and neuroconsult. Move, people, move! Amidst the stream of victims, one gurney was pushed to the side, into a low-priority bay. On it lay a man. He was covered in dirt, grease, and blood, his clothes torn. No identification, no wallet. Just another John Doe, one of a dozen from the crash. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow. A harried-looking resident, Dr. Wells, did a quick initial assessment. Stable for now. Multiple contusions, possible internal bleeding. Let's get him in the queue for a scan. Finch, striding past, glanced at the John Doe with undisguised disinterest. In the next bay was a city councilman with a broken leg, loudly demanding attention. Finch's priority was clear. The VIPs, the ones with insurance and influence, came first. Internal bleeding? Finch scoffed without breaking his stride. He can wait. There's a line. Slap a saline drip on him and move on to someone who matters. Dr. Wells hesitated. Sir, his pressure is a little erratic, and there's a strange rigidity in his abdomen. Finch stopped and turned, his face a mask of impatience. Wells, are you questioning my triage assessment? I have a man with a potential thoracic dissection in Bay 3, and you're worried about a vagrant stomachache? Get him prepped for a standard exploratory laparotomy when a room opens up. Maybe in an hour, maybe 2. Now get out of my way. He was gone. Wells, chastened, scribbled a quick order on the chart. John Doe, probable internal hemorrhage, prep for X-lap. He handed the chart to an orderly. Take this up to records. We'll call for him when we have a slot. The orderly navigated the chaos and took the elevator to the 5th floor. He dropped the thin folder into Alara's inbox. New one from the pileup, he said, and left. Alara picked up the folder. John Doe. She opened it. The familiar routine began to soothe her frayed nerves. Name, blank. Age, estimated 30 to 35. Initial assessment, multiple contusions, lacerations. Dr. Finch's scrawled, arrogant handwriting jumped out at her. Probable internal hemorrhage. Prep for X-lap. She began typing the information into the system, her fingers moving across the keyboard with their usual slow precision. Then she stopped. Her eyes were fixed on the printout from the initial EKG monitor. It was tucked behind the assessment sheet. It wasn't the pattern that caught her eye. It was the noise. Tiny, almost imperceptible spasms in the electrical baseline. Artifacts, most nurses would call them. A loose lead, a patient shivering. But this was different. It was rhythmic, uniform. Her blood went cold. She had seen this before. Not in a hospital, but in a field manual. A classified briefing on emerging threats. It was a specific type of fasciculation, a tremor in the muscle tissue at a cellular level. It was not a symptom of internal bleeding. It was a symptom of nerve agent poisoning. Her eyes darted back to the assessment notes. Strange rigidity in his abdomen. It wasn't the rigidity of a belly full of blood. It was decerebrate posturing, a sign of severe brainstem injury, or in this case, a central nervous system under chemical attack. Finch's order was a death sentence. Opening up a patient exposed to a cholinesterase inhibitor without proper atropine pre-treatment would trigger a massive, irreversible vagal response. The moment the scalpel touched his skin, his heart would simply stop. Alara's own heart hammered against her ribs. This couldn't be right. It had to be a mistake. This was a civilian hospital in the middle of America. But the signs were all there. A ghost from her past, screaming a warning. She stood up, the file clutched in her hand. The quiet of the records room suddenly felt suffocating. Downstairs, a man was going to die because of a pompous fool's ego. And she was the only one who knew it. The snail had to move. Her feet felt like lead as she walked to the elevator. Every instinct screamed at her to go back, to hide, to pretend she hadn't seen it. Dr. Finch would destroy her. He would humiliate her in a way that would make this morning's incident feel like a pleasantry. He would have her fired, blacklisted. But then an image flashed in her mind. A young ranger, his face pale, his eyes pleading with her as their Black Hawk shuddered from enemy fire. She had failed to save him. The memory was a hot brand on her soul. Never again. The elevator doors opened onto the barely controlled chaos of the ER. Alara scanned the bays, her eyes moving with a speed and focus that would have shocked her colleagues. She spotted Dr. Wells, the resident Finch had overruled, frantically trying to intubate another patient. "Dr. Wells," she said, her voice quiet but firm. He glanced up, annoyed. "What is it? Can't you see I'm busy?" "The John Doe," she said, holding out the chart. "The one from the crash. You can't operate. It's not internal bleeding." Wells stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. "Who are you?" "I work in records," she said, hating how small it sounded. "But I saw something on the EKG, the fasciculations, and your note about abdominal rigidity. It could be organophosphate exposure, a nerve agent." Wells actually laughed, a short, sharp, disbelieving sound. "A nerve agent? Lady, this is downtown, not a spy movie. He was in a car crash. He's bleeding internally. Now please, get back to your filing." He turned away, dismissing her completely. Panic began to bubble in Alara's chest. She saw two orderlies starting to move the John Doe's gurney. They were taking him to the pre-op staging area. Time was running out. She saw Finch across the room, directing the treatment of the city councilman. Taking a deep breath, she walked straight towards him. The shark's den. "Dr. Finch," she said. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he recognized her. "I believe I gave you a simple task, Vance. Are you so incompetent you can't even handle that?" "The John Doe, sir," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "The one you ordered to surgery. Please, you have to reconsider. The presentation is consistent with neurotoxin exposure. If you open him up, he'll go into cardiac arrest." For a moment, Finch was silent. He stared at her, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Then his face twisted into a mask of pure fury. "Are you insane?" he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "Are you actually trying to practice medicine? You? A clerk? You are seconds away from being thrown out of this hospital for good." "But the EKG," she started. "I don't give a damn about the EKG," he roared, his voice now echoing through the ER. All activity around them seemed to slow as everyone turned to watch. "I am the chief of trauma surgery. I have forgotten more about medicine than you will ever know. I made a diagnosis. That man is going into my operating room. And you," he jabbed a finger in her face, "are going back to your sad little room, or you are fired. Do you understand me?" His words were a physical blow. Humiliation washed over her, hot and suffocating. She saw the smirks on the faces of the other doctors. She saw Chloe's look of helpless pity. "Get him to OR2, now!" Finch barked at the orderlies. They started pushing the gurney again. Alara watched it move away, watched the life of an unknown man tick down to its final minutes. The face of the dead ranger flashed in her mind again, pleading. Something inside her broke, or maybe it was finally pieced back together. She didn't think. She acted. She darted forward, cutting off the gurney's path. "Wait," she said to the startled orderlies. "There's been a mistake. Dr. Finch wanted this patient moved to radiology for an emergency CT. Base 6 is the one for OR2. The orderlies looked confused. In the chaos, instructions were constantly changing. Alara's tone was clipped, authoritative. It was a voice no one in this hospital had ever heard her use. "Now," she commanded. They hesitated, then complied, turning the gurney down a different hallway. Finch was on the other side of the ER, his back to them. Alara's heart was a jackhammer. She had seconds. She walked briskly alongside the gurney, her mind racing. She directed the orderlies down a service corridor, away from the main flow of traffic. "I'll take it from here," she said. Her voice brooked no argument. "There's a portable scanner on this wing. I'll bring him." They handed off the gurney and hurried back to the ER. Alara was alone with the unconscious man. She didn't go towards radiology. She pushed the gurney straight into a large, dark supply closet. She flicked on the light, locked the door, and leaned against it, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had just committed career suicide. She had assaulted a patient, by their definition. She had defied a direct order from the chief of surgery. She looked at the man on the gurney. His face was slack, his skin pale under a layer of grime. She put 2 fingers to his neck. His pulse was thready, weak, bradycardic. Another sign. There was no time for regret. She scanned the shelves of the supply closet. Saline bags, bandages, bedpans. Useless. She needed a crash cart. She peered through the small wire glass window in the door. The hallway was empty. She unlocked the door, slipped out, and moved down the hall with a silent, fluid purpose that was utterly alien to Ellie the snail. She found a crash cart parked outside an empty room. She checked the drawers. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency. She found what she was looking for. Vials of atropine, pralidoxime, the standard issue nerve agent antidote combo. But for the symptoms she suspected, the dosage would have to be massive. And there was something else she needed. A paralytic reversal agent, Sugamidex. It was new, expensive, and rarely stocked on standard carts. She rummaged through the lower drawers. Nothing. Desperation clawed at her. Then she saw it, tucked away in the back of the intubation kit. A single, pristine vial. It was a miracle. She grabbed what she needed, stuffing the vials into her pockets, and slipped back towards the supply closet. As she reached the door, she heard footsteps. Heavy, angry footsteps. "Where is he? Where is the John Doe?" It was Finch's voice, echoing down the corridor. Alara's blood ran cold. She fumbled with the lock, her hands suddenly clumsy again. She got the door open, slipped inside, and shut it just as Finch and 2 large security guards rounded the corner. She didn't have time to lock it. She threw her body weight against the door as the handle jiggled. "Open this door!" Finch bellowed. Inside the cramped closet, Alara ignored him. Her focus narrowed to a single point of purpose. Save the patient. She ripped open an alcohol swab and wiped the man's arm. She drew the atropine into a syringe, her movement swift and sure. The ghosts of 100 screaming helicopter engines filled her ears, but her hands were rock steady. The door shuddered as a guard slammed his shoulder against it. "This is your final warning," Finch shrieked. "You are assaulting a patient and obstructing medical care." Alara found a vein. She slid the needle in. She began to push the plunger. Crack! The door frame splintered. The door flew open, slamming her against a set of metal shelves. Vials and boxes rained down around her. Finch stood in the doorway, his face purple with rage. The 2 security guards flanked him, looking uncertain. They saw a small, terrified-looking clerk with a syringe in a patient's arm. "Get her off him!" Finch screamed. "She's trying to kill him!" One of the guards lunged, grabbing Alara's arm. The syringe was still half full. She tried to fight, to finish the injection, but he was too strong. He twisted her arm behind her back, forcing her to drop the syringe. It clattered to the floor. "I have you on a dozen different charges, you psychotic little worm," Finch spat, stepping over her to look at the patient. He saw the needle in the man's arm. "What did you give him?" Alara didn't answer. She was breathing heavily, tears of frustration and fury stinging her eyes. "It doesn't matter," Finch said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "You're finished. Not just here. Everywhere. I will personally see to it that you never work in a hospital, a clinic, or even a veterinarian's office again." He turned to the guards. "Get her out of my sight. Get her out of my hospital. Throw her out on the street." The guards hauled Alara to her feet. They were rough, pulling her arms up high behind her back. She cried out in pain. They dragged her from the closet, past a gathering crowd of stunned hospital staff. She could feel their eyes on her, a mixture of shock, confusion, and for some, satisfaction. She saw Chloe, her face pale, her hand over her mouth. She saw Dr. Peterson, a triumphant smirk on his face. She saw Dr. Wells, looking down at the floor, unable to meet her gaze. They were dragging her through the main entrance of the ER, towards the glass doors that led to the street. The morning sun was bright, glinting off the chrome of the waiting ambulances. Rain had started to fall, a light drizzle that streaked the glass. This was it. The end. She was fired, disgraced, a failure. And then she heard it, a sound that cut through the city noise, through the rain, through the wail of the sirens. It was a sound she knew in her bones, the deep, percussive whump, whump, whump of heavy rotor blades. It wasn't the sound of a news chopper or a police helicopter. It was the sound of war. It grew louder, deeper, a physical vibration that rattled the windows of the ER. Everyone stopped. Doctors, nurses, patients, all looked towards the street in confusion. Two sleek black helicopters, devoid of any markings, descended from the gray sky. They didn't land in a designated area. They landed directly on the 4-lane street in front of the hospital, their downdraft blasting cars, sending trash and rain scattering in every direction. Traffic screeched to a halt. The side doors of the helicopters slid open before they even touched the ground. Teams of men, clad head to toe in black tactical gear and armed with short-barreled rifles, poured out. They moved with a terrifying, silent efficiency. They formed a perimeter, securing the street. Then, a group of them broke off and stormed towards the entrance of the hospital. The security guards holding Alara froze, their mouths agape. They let go of her arms. Dr. Finch stood just inside the doors, his face a comical mask of disbelief and outrage. The soldiers burst through the doors, fanning out, their weapons held in a low, ready position. They weren't aggressive, but their presence was an overwhelming statement of power. The buzzing chaos of the ER died into a stunned, absolute silence. A man stepped through the ranks of the soldiers. He was older, his face a granite mask of authority. He wore the same black tactical gear, but on his collar were the stars of a general. He was flanked by a younger officer, a major, whose eyes were like chips of ice. General Sterling. Alara's heart stopped. The general's eyes swept the room, taking in the scene with a single, all-encompassing glance. He ignored the stunned doctors, the frightened nurses. He ignored Dr. Finch, who was puffing out his chest, preparing to assert his authority. The major stepped forward, his voice calm and clear, yet it carried the weight of absolute command. This facility is now under temporary federal jurisdiction, by order of the Department of Defense. Do not interfere. We are looking for a medical officer. Codename Angel. A collective, confused murmur went through the room. Angel? Who was Angel? Dr. Finch finally found his voice. I am Dr. Alistair Finch, Chief of Surgery. Who in God's name do you think you are? You can't just... The major didn't even look at him. His gaze continued to sweep the room, searching. His eyes passed over Alara, then snapped back. He saw her slumped figure, her rumpled clerk's uniform, the tear tracks on her face, the faint scar above her eye. His expression, for a fraction of a second, softened with something like recognition and relief. He walked directly towards her, his boots making no sound on the linoleum floor. The crowd of hospital staff parted before him like the Red Sea. He stopped in front of Alara, who was still standing in a daze between the two dumbfounded security guards. Let her go, the major said, his voice quiet but laced with steel. The guards instantly complied, stepping back as if she were radioactive. The major looked at Alara. He saw the lingering shame and fear in her eyes. Captain Vance, he said softly, using her real name, her real rank. Are you all right? Alara could only nod, a fresh wave of tears threatening to spill. He held out a hardened satellite phone. General Sterling for you, ma'am. Slowly, her hand trembling, Alara took the phone. The weight of it was familiar. She raised it to her ear. Angel, a voice rumbled from the phone. The voice of her old commanding officer. The voice of the man who had personally decorated her for bravery. Report. Something shifted inside Alara. The shame, the fear, the humiliation, it all burned away, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. Her back straightened. Her chin came up. The timid, mousy clerk vanished. In her place stood a soldier. Angel here, she said, her voice crisp and clear, cutting through the silence of the ER. Asset is compromised. I've identified the vector as a VX-class organophosphate, likely a new generation. I was unable to administer the full countermeasure protocol. The attending physician is actively hostile and was attempting to perform a contraindicated surgical procedure that would have been lethal. A dead silence hung in the room. Every eye was on Alara. Dr. Finch's face had gone from purple with rage to a ghastly, chalky white. He was staring at her, at this stranger in the familiar body of his favorite victim. Alara listened for a moment to the voice on the phone. "Yes, sir," she said. "Understood." She handed the phone back to the major. She turned, her gaze sweeping over the stunned faces of her former colleagues. She was no longer seeing them as tormentors or judges. She was seeing them as obstacles, civilians in an operational theater. Then, her eyes landed on Dr. Finch. She walked towards him. The soldiers fell into formation behind her, a silent, lethal honor guard. She was no longer Ellie the Snail, being dragged out in disgrace. She was a commander, returning to take control. Finch sputtered, trying to regain some semblance of authority. "This is insane! I am in charge here! This woman is a clerk! She's mentally unstable! I had her fired!" The major stepped up beside Alara, placing himself between her and Finch. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Dr. Finch, your authority regarding the patient designated John Doe is hereby terminated under the powers granted by the National Security and Emergency Powers Act." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Captain Alara Vance of the United States Air Force Medical Command is now in charge of all medical care for the asset. You and your staff will provide her with any and all assistance she requires. Is that clear?" Captain. The word echoed in the cavernous room. Captain Alara Vance. Finch's jaw worked silently. The color had completely drained from his face. He looked at Alara, truly looked at her, and saw not the meek paper pusher, but the hard, uncompromising eyes of a military officer. He saw the faint scar not as a flaw, but as a mark of experience. He finally understood. He had not been tormenting a snail. He had been poking a viper. "Captain?" he whispered, the sound pathetic. Alara didn't give him the satisfaction of a reply. She turned to the major. "The asset is in a supply closet down the north service corridor. He's received approximately 2 milligrams of atropine intravenously. It's not enough. We need to move. Now." "My team is ready," the major said. "Good," Alara commanded. "I need a full med pack. Specifically, I need at least 20 milligrams more of atropine, 1,800 milligrams of pralidoxime, and any sugamidex you have. And I need a secure location. This hospital is compromised." The major nodded. "We have a containment vehicle. Armored ambulance with full life support. It's waiting." He turned to 2 of his soldiers. "You have your orders. Get the captain what she needs." The soldiers moved with swift purpose, one heading for the door, the other producing a ruggedized medical kit. Alara strode past the frozen form of Dr. Finch, heading back towards the supply closet. The major and 2 more soldiers followed her. As she passed Chloe, the young nurse stared at her with wide, awe-filled eyes. "Ellie?" Alara gave her a curt, professional nod. "It's Captain Vance," she said, not unkindly, and continued down the hall. She led the team to the closet. The John Doe was still on the gurney, his condition visibly deteriorating. His skin was clammy, and the fine tremors were now visible across his chest and arms. Alara went to work immediately. The soldier handed her the pack. She pulled out syringes and vials, her hands a blur of efficiency. "His name is Captain Marcus Thorne," she said to the major as she prepared the injections. "Call sign, Titan. He's Delta, one of ours." The major's jaw tightened. "I know, ma'am. He was on a transport. We thought it was just a traffic accident until he missed his check-in." "It wasn't an accident," Alara said, injecting the massive dose of atropine into Thorne's 1V line. "This neurotoxin, VX3, is an assassination tool. It's designed to mimic the symptoms of a cerebral hemorrhage or massive internal bleeding. They wanted him to die on a civilian operating table, looking like just another crash victim." Her words hung in the air. The pileup wasn't random. It was a targeted attack on a high-value asset. "The intel said he was transporting the counter-agent," the major said, his voice grim. "He was," Alara confirmed, her focus entirely on her patient. The only sample in existence. It must have been lost or destroyed in the crash. Or taken. She checked Thorne's pupils, still constricted. This isn't enough. We need to get him to a secure facility where I can synthesize a new batch of the reversal agent. The formula is in my head, but I need a proper lab. We have a contingency site, the Major said. A decommissioned research outpost in the mountains. It's off-grid. We can be there in 30 minutes. Let's move, Alara commanded, adjusting Thorne's 1.5 drip. We'll have to manage his seizures manually on the way. Meanwhile, in his office, Dr. Alistair Finch was falling apart. His world had been turned upside down. The insignificant clerk he had tormented for months was a military captain. The federal government had stormed his hospital and stripped him of his authority. His humiliation was absolute. But beneath the humiliation was a deeper, colder emotion. Terror. He locked his office door and pulled out his personal cell phone. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely dial the number. He had debts. Gambling debts. The kind of debts that got a man's legs broken. A few months ago, a man in an expensive suit had made him an offer. A consulting fee, he'd called it. All Finch had to do was provide information occasionally, and sometimes look the other way. The money had been incredible. It had solved all his problems. He knew he was dealing with dangerous people, a private defense contractor with a reputation for ruthlessness. But he thought he was insulated, protected by his status. He was wrong. They had called him 2 days ago. They told him a package would be moving through his area of operations. They said it might end up in his hospital. If it did, he was to ensure the package did not survive. They described the symptoms of a car crash victim with severe internal bleeding. They told him to rush the package to surgery. He had done exactly as he was told. He had been a pawn in an assassination plot, and now the military was here. The phone was answered on the first ring. Yes? The voice was cold, clipped. It's me, Finch stammered. There's a problem. A big problem. The asset. He's here. But the military showed up. A whole damn platoon of them. They've taken over. There was a pause on the other end of the line. And the asset's condition? He's alive, Finch said, his voice cracking. There's a woman. A captain. She knew what it was. She stopped the surgery. Describe her, the voice demanded. I don't know. Brown hair. Quiet. They call her Angel. Another, longer pause. The silence was terrifying. We know of her. This complicates things. Is the asset still in the hospital? Yes, but they're preparing to move him, Finch said, desperation making him forthcoming. They have an armored ambulance. They mentioned a secure location. He was sweating profusely, his starched collar wilting. What do I do? They're going to find out about me. They'll trace it back. Calm yourself, doctor, the voice said, though it held no comfort. Your panic is unprofessional. You will do nothing. You will cooperate with the military. You will be the picture of a concerned, confused physician. We will handle the asset. And we will handle the angel. The line went dead. Finch stared at his phone, a new kind of fear gripping him. He was trapped. His only hope was that these mysterious, ruthless people would succeed where he had failed. Back in the corridor, Alara's team was ready to move. 2 soldiers pushed Captain Thorne's gurney, which was now draped with a blanket to obscure him. Alara walked beside it, monitoring his vitals on a portable screen. The Major led the way, his hand on his sidearm. We'll create a diversion at the main entrance, the Major said into his radio. We'll exit through the loading dock in the rear. They moved quickly down a series of back hallways. As they passed a junction, a janitor pushed a large cleaning cart out from a side room, blocking their path. He was mopping the floor, his head down. Excuse me, the Major said, his voice hard. The janitor didn't look up. He just kept mopping, blocking their way. Alara's eyes narrowed. Something was wrong. The janitor's uniform was too clean for the end of a shift. His movements were too deliberate. And his shoes. Under the worn trousers, she could see the distinct shape and tread of tactical combat boots. Her training screamed. Danger. The janitor's hand, the one not on the mop, was hidden behind the cart. He was slowly reaching for something. Get down! Alara screamed, shoving the Major with all her strength. At the same instant, the janitor abandoned the mop and brought up a hand. In it was a pistol fitted with a long, bulky suppressor. The quiet put-put of the weapon was almost lost in the hospital hum. The major hit the floor as 2 rounds stitched the wall where his head had been a second before. One of the soldiers escorting the gurney was already in motion. He didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle. Crack! A single, loud shot, unsuppressed, echoed like a thunderclap in the confined hallway. The janitor assassin was thrown backward, a dark hole appearing in the center of his chest. He collapsed in a heap, his weapon clattering to the floor. Silence. The smell of cordite filled the air. The major got to his feet, his face grim. He looked at Alara, who was breathing heavily, her hand still outstretched from where she had shoved him. Good call, Captain. Alara's eyes were on the dead assassin. The hospital's compromised. They knew we were here. They knew our route. She looked at the major, her gaze hard. There's a leak. We're not secure until we're in the air, the major agreed. Let's go. Double time. They didn't wait for a diversion. They burst out of the loading dock doors into the falling rain. The armored ambulance was waiting, its engine rumbling. The soldiers loaded Captain Thorne into the back with practiced speed. Alara jumped in right behind him, not even waiting for the ramp to retract. Go, go, go! The major yelled, jumping into the passenger seat. The ambulance tires squealed on the wet pavement as it peeled out of the hospital parking lot, leaving the chaos and the dead assassin behind. Inside the swaying, cramped vehicle, Alara worked feverishly to keep Marcus Thorne alive. The city lights streaked past the small, reinforced windows as they raced towards the mountains, towards a sanctuary that was their only hope. The battle for Metropolitan General was over. The war for Captain Thorne's life had just begun. The ambulance climbed, leaving the city grid behind, winding its way up dark mountain roads slick with rain. Inside, the world was a swaying box of dim lights and beeping monitors. Alara moved with the rhythm of the vehicle, her body accustomed to working in unstable environments. She was a combat flight nurse again. This was her element. Captain Thorne's condition was deteriorating. The seizures were becoming more frequent, violent spasms that racked his body. The atropine was holding off the worst of the cardiac effects, but the neurotoxin was relentlessly attacking his central nervous system. How much longer? She asked, her voice tight, as she administered another dose of diazepam to control a seizure. 5 minutes out, the major's voice crackled from the front cab. The ambulance turned off the main road onto a dirt track, hidden by a thick canopy of pine trees. It bumped and jostled for another mile before breaking into a clearing. In the center stood a rustic, unassuming log cabin. It looked like a hunting lodge, but Alara knew the logs were likely reinforced with steel, and the windows were ballistic glass. The vehicle backed up to the main door. The team moved with the same swift efficiency, transferring Thorne from the ambulance into the cabin. The interior was a stark contrast to the rustic exterior. It was a compact, state-of-the-art medical and communications hub. Get him on that bed, Alara ordered, pointing to a reinforced gurney in the center of the main room. I need him hooked up to that monitor, and find me the chemistry station. I need to start synthesis immediately. A soldier pointed to a heavy steel door. Lab's through there, ma'am. Fully stocked. Good. Alara turned to the major. I need 2 hours, maybe 3. Keep him alive and keep the perimeter secure. No one gets in or out. You've got it, Captain, the major said. He was already deploying his men, setting up a defensive perimeter around the cabin, his voice a low, constant murmur on the radio as he coordinated fields of fire and patrol routes. Alara disappeared into the lab. It was small, but pristine. Beakers, centrifuges, chemical synthesizers. Her mind, a repository of classified medical protocols, went to work. The formula for the VX3 reversal agent was complex. It required precise measurements, perfect timing. Any mistake would render it useless. She pulled her hair back, washed her hands with surgical precision, and began. The world outside the lab ceased to exist. There was only the quiet hum of the machines, the clink of glass, and the complex dance of chemistry. Hours passed. Darkness fell completely outside, the rain turning from a drizzle to a downpour. Inside the main room, the major stood over a topographical map, coordinating his small team. They were an island in a vast, dark wilderness. Status report, he said into his comms. Sector 1, clear, a voice crackled back. Nothing on thermal. Sector 2, clear. Wait, the voice changed. I've got movement. Edge of the tree line, west side. The major was instantly alert. How many? Can't tell. They're using the terrain. Thermal is spotty with this rain. More than one. Maybe 5. No, wait. 10. At least 10. They found us, the major said, his voice grim. He looked towards the lab door. Captain Vance is not to be disturbed. All posts, prepare to engage. This is now a kill-on-sight engagement. Hold them at the tree line as long as you can. The first shot was a muffled crack from the woods. It was answered by a burst of automatic fire from one of the soldiers positioned by a window. The siege had begun. Inside the lab, Alara was in the final stages of synthesis. She was filtering the compound, her focus absolute. The sounds of the firefight outside were a distant, muffled drumbeat, a familiar soundtrack to her work. She blocked it out. She had a job to do. In the main room, the fight intensified. The attackers were professionals. They moved in coordinated teams, using the trees and the darkness for cover, trying to find a weak point in the cabin's defense. Muzzle flashes lit up the dark woods. The windows on the west side of the cabin cracked and starred as bullets slammed into them, but the ballistic glass held. "They're trying to flank us on the south side," a soldier yelled. "They're using the ravine for cover." Captain Thorne, lying on the gurney, began to seize again, more violently this time. The soldier assigned to watch him, a young medic, tried to hold him down. "Sir, the captain's vitals are crashing." The major cursed. He was pinned down, returning fire through a gun port. "Where's Vance?" Just then, the lab door opened. Alara emerged, holding a large syringe filled with a clear, viscous liquid. Her face was pale with exhaustion, but her eyes were bright, determined. "It's ready," she said, her voice calm despite the cacophony of the firefight. She moved to Thorne's side, ignoring the bullets smacking against the cabin walls. She injected the contents of the syringe into his IV port. "Now we wait," she said. "It'll take a few minutes to counteract the toxin." A loud explosion rocked the north side of the cabin. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into emergency backup lighting, a dim, red glow. "They've breached the outer door," the major yelled. "Fall back to the main room. Form a final defensive line." 2 soldiers stumbled back from a hallway, one of them clutching a bleeding arm. The heavy steel door at the end of the hall buckled inward. The enemy was inside. They were down to 4 defenders, including the major. The medic was trying to shield Thorne's body. Alara stood beside him, her work done, suddenly feeling useless without a weapon. A mercenary in black gear appeared in the hallway, his rifle raised. The major and another soldier opened fire, driving him back. But more would be coming. Then, a new sound. A crash of glass from the back of the cabin. Another mercenary, who had silently scaled the rear wall and broken through a smaller window, dropped into the room behind them. He landed in a crouch, his weapon swinging towards Captain Thorne. He was too close. No one else saw him. No one but Alara. Time seemed to slow down. She saw the mercenary raise his rifle. She saw the fallen soldier next to her, his sidearm still in its holster on his hip. Without a thought, she lunged. She drew the pistol from the holster, the cold, familiar weight settling into her hand. It had been years, but her body remembered. Stance, grip, sight picture. The mercenary's eyes widened in surprise as he saw her move. He swung his rifle towards her. He was too slow. Alara fired twice. The sound was deafening in the small room. 2 tight shots. Center mass. The mercenary grunted, a look of shock on his face. He stumbled backward, then collapsed, his rifle clattering on the floor. Alara stood over him, the pistol held steady in a 2-handed grip, smoke curling from the barrel. She was breathing heavily, adrenaline singing in her veins. In the dim red light, she was no longer a doctor or a clerk. She was a warrior, protecting her charge. The major stared at her, his expression a mixture of shock and awe. "Captain." Before he could finish, a new sound cut through the battle, the unmistakable, thunderous roar of more helicopters. But these were bigger, heavier. These were the big guns. Bright searchlights flooded the clearing, turning night into day. The mercenaries outside, caught in the open, broke and scattered. The sound of heavy machine guns from above opened up, tearing through the trees. The cavalry had arrived. General Sterling had brought the wrath of the entire United States military down on this small patch of woods. Within minutes, it was over. Soldiers rappelled from the hovering helicopters, securing the cabin and rounding up the few surviving mercenaries. General Sterling himself strode into the cabin, his face like thunder. He took in the scene, the bullet-pocked walls, the dead mercenary, and Alara, still holding the pistol, standing guard over her patient. He walked over to Captain Thorne. The young medic looked up. "Sir, his vitals are stabilizing. The seizures have stopped. I think she did it." Sterling looked at Alara, his hard expression softening. "I never doubted it for a second, Captain." He looked at the pistol in her hand. "It seems I keep forgetting you're as good with one of those as you are with a syringe." Alara finally lowered the weapon, the adrenaline beginning to drain away, leaving a profound exhaustion in its wake. "Just doing my job, sir," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You did more than that," Sterling said grimly. "The men we captured outside are from a private firm, Kestrel Dynamics, and they're very talkative now that they're facing federal charges. They've already given up their contact." He looked Alara in the eye. "Dr. Alastair Finch." The next morning, the lobby of Metropolitan General Hospital was swarming with news reporters and television cameras. The story of the hospital siege and the dramatic military intervention had leaked. Dr. Finch, looking pale but composed, stood at a hastily assembled podium, preparing to address the media. He had spent the night crafting his story. He would be the hero, the victim of a crazed, disgruntled employee and an overzealous military. "As chief of surgery," he began, his voice smooth and practiced, "my primary concern has always been the safety and well-being of my patients. Yesterday, we were faced with an unprecedented situation. A deeply disturbed staff member, a records clerk named Alara Vance, suffered a psychotic break. He was in his element, controlling the narrative, his arrogance restored." "That's a lie." The voice, amplified by the lobby's acoustics, cut through Finch's speech. The crowd of reporters turned. General Sterling stood at the back of the lobby. Flanked by 2 armed military police, he began to walk forward. The crowd parted before him. Beside him walked Captain Alara Vance. She was not in her clerk's uniform. She was wearing her Air Force dress blues, her captain's bars gleaming on her shoulders, a row of metal ribbons adorning her chest. Among them, prominent and proud, was the distinguished Flying Cross. Finch froze at the podium, his face instantly draining of all color. "Dr. Alastair Finch is not a hero," General Sterling boomed, his voice radiating pure command. "He is a traitor and a co-conspirator to attempted murder." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed wildly. "These are baseless accusations," Finch stammered, his composure shattering. "This is slander." "Is it?" Sterling said, his voice cold as ice. He nodded to an aide, who connected a device to the press conference sound system. Finch's voice, panicked and whining, filled the lobby. "It's me. There's a problem. A big problem. The asset. He's here." But the military showed up. The secret phone call he had made from his office, recorded by military intelligence, played for the entire world to hear. Finch looked like he had been turned to stone. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "Furthermore," Sterling continued, his voice relentless, "we have security footage of Dr. Finch personally granting access to a secure wing to this man." A large screen behind the podium, which was supposed to be showing the hospital's logo, flickered to life. It showed the dead assassin, dressed as a janitor. It showed Dr. Finch swiping his keycard and letting him through a locked door, just minutes before the attempted assassination. The evidence was irrefutable. The narrative was destroyed. Finch's face, broadcast on live television, crumbled. The arrogance, the pride, the cruelty, it all melted away, revealing the sniveling, terrified coward beneath. "No," he whimpered. "No, it's not what it looks like. They forced me." The debts. 2 men in dark suits and FBI jackets stepped forward. They moved past the general, past Alara, and walked directly up to the podium. "Alastair Finch," one of them said, his voice flat, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, treason, and aiding and abetting an enemy of the United States." "Lies! It's all lies!" Finch shrieked as they pulled his hands behind his back. The sharp click of handcuffs echoed through the silent lobby. "I'm a doctor! I'm the chief of surgery! You can't do this to me!" He was sobbing now, tears and snot running down his face as they dragged him away from the podium, a pathetic, weeping ruin of a man. The reporters swarmed, their cameras capturing his utter and complete humiliation. General Sterling stepped up to the podium. He waited for the chaos to subside. He then turned his gaze to the woman standing beside him. "This," he said, his voice resonating with pride, "is the real hero. This is Captain Alara Vance, United States Air Force." Yesterday, due to her profound medical knowledge and her unwavering courage, she saved the life of a decorated American soldier. She did so in the face of ridicule, insubordination, and direct threats from Dr. Finch. He looked out at the crowd, at the employees of Metropolitan General who had gathered to watch. He saw Chloe, the young nurse, tears of joy streaming down her face. She started to clap, hesitantly at first, then with more force. Someone else joined in, then another. Soon, the entire lobby was filled with a thunderous ovation. It was for Alara. Alara stood tall, her posture perfect, but a single tear traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness or shame. It was a tear of release, of vindication. The weight she had carried for years, the shame of the past and the humiliation of the present, finally lifted. Later, in a quiet office upstairs, General Sterling sat across from Alara. The sounds of the hospital had returned to their normal rhythm, but for Alara, everything had changed. "Captain Thorne is being transferred to Walter Reed," Sterling said. "He's going to make a full recovery. Thanks to you. He asked me to tell you, he owes you everything." Alara nodded, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time in years. "Just tell him to get back on his feet, sir." "I will," Sterling said. He leaned forward. "Alara, the world has changed. The threats we face are more complex. We need people with your unique skill set, a warrior's courage and a healer's hands. We're putting together a new unit, under Joint Special Operations Command, a fast response, special operations medical team. They'll be the scalpel, not the hammer, going into places no one else can, to save lives no one else can." He paused, his gaze intense. "I'm not asking you to join it. I'm asking you to build it, and to lead it. Major Vance." The promotion was unexpected. Major, commander of her own elite unit. A chance to do what she was born to do, without hiding, without shame. She started, overwhelmed. "Sir, I accept." A week later, Alara was at a military airfield, supervising the loading of equipment onto a C-17 transport plane. Her new life. She wore a flight suit, and she moved with an energy and confidence that made her seem like a different person. Leaving without saying goodbye? She turned. Leaning against a Humvee was Captain Marcus Thorne. He was in a wheelchair, but his eyes were clear and strong. He was smiling. "They told me you were here," he said, wheeling himself closer. "I had to see the angel who saved my life." Alara felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "I was just doing my job, Captain." "My name is Marcus," he said, "and you did more than your job. They told me what happened. In the hospital. In the cabin. You never gave up on me." She instinctively touched the scar on her temple, a nervous habit she was trying to break. "I don't give up on our people," she said softly. Marcus reached out and gently moved her hand away. His fingers brushed against the scar, his touch surprisingly gentle. He looked at it not with pity, but with a deep, knowing respect. "I know," he said. "That's what makes you who you are." For the first time, she didn't feel the need to hide it. She smiled, a real, radiant smile that transformed her face. "My physical therapy is at the same base your unit is being formed," he said, his eyes twinkling. "Looks like I'll be seeing you around, Major." "I look forward to it, Captain," she said. A sergeant called out to her. "Ma'am, we're ready for you." Alara gave Marcus one last look, a promise of things to come. Then she turned and walked towards the massive transport plane, her back straight, her steps sure and steady. She walked away from the shadows of her past and into the bright, limitless sky of her future. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content, and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. The story of Captain Alara Vance serves as a powerful reminder of several important values. Firstly, it teaches us to never judge a book by its cover. People who may seem quiet or unassuming on the surface can possess incredible strength, skill, and courage deep down. Alara's colleagues dismissed her as the snail, but in reality, she was a highly decorated and capable hero. Secondly, the story highlights that true strength is not about status, arrogance, or authority, but about character, integrity, and the willingness to do the right thing, even when it's difficult. Dr. Finch had all the power and prestige, but his ego and corruption made him weak. Alara, with no official power in that hospital, showed true strength by risking everything to save a life. This shows us that doing the right thing will always pay off in the end, as her bravery was ultimately recognized and rewarded. What would you have done if you were in Alara's position? Would you have risked your career to save a patient from a powerful and arrogant doctor? Let me know in the comments below. We love hearing your thoughts and opinions on these moral dilemmas. If you enjoyed this story and the lessons it contained, please smash that like button to show your support. It really helps the channel grow and allows us to bring you more content like this. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. We have new stories coming out all the time that we know you'll love. Thank you for watching and for being a part of our community. Have a nice rest of your day.